Just say the words. You can go home.
I love you. Viva Cristo Rey.
Sons of Scotland, I am William Wallace.
William Wallace is 7 feet tall.
Yes, I've heard. He kills men by the hundred. And if he were here, he'd consume the English with fireballs from his eyes and bolts of lightning from his arse. I am William Wallace. And I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. You've come to fight as free men. And free men you are. What will you do with that freedom? Will you fight? Fight against that? No! We will run! And we will live. Aye. Fight and you may die. Run and you'll live. At least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Donald Trump is now back in the White House as his second term heats up. Is woke culture dead? Has the culture war shifted toward a reemergence of Catholic masculinity? Fourth Musketeer Ryan joins us tonight as we discuss this and more on The Edge. Oh, okay. Okay, sorry, false start. Didn't get our intro. Let's just give one more try at our intro here. All right, so after that little bit of a false start, we'll get started here on The Edge. I am Dan, your host, Dan Davis, and I'm here tonight with William and our fourth Musketeer, Ryan. And Dominic is, let's say Dominic's on assignment tonight, and he won't be joining us. There's a chance that Kevin will join us, but it's 2 a.m. for him, and I don't hold my expectations up real high. So tonight we're going to be talking about the return of Catholic masculinity and how changes in the in social, just the social discourse in the last several months or so, I think have hopefully put us on a little bit better tiding for basically a return to Catholic masculinity. And we've got a very good video we're going to show tonight, and then a bunch of other features, and we'll get into some news. So I think we lost Ryan. Are you still there? I think we lost Ryan for the moment. So we'd like to start with introductions, and I'll start with myself. I am Dan Davis. I'm the host, and also part-time contributor and kind of second in command over at Catholic Family Podcast. And we are glad to have you tonight for what we're hoping is going to be a great discussion. So, William, you want to go second here?
Yep, William Davis, an avid enjoyer of all things medieval reenactment, and a casual enjoyer of the codes of chivalry, and also a proud wage slave.
You're welcome to the wage slave world. Yes.
Amen.
Ryan, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, hi. I'm Ryan. I'm a husband, dad. I guess I'm a wage slave. We all are these days. I don't have anything catchy to say, so I'm just happy to be here, and I'll work through these technical issues as quickly as I can. Yeah,
we're all having technical issues. I actually tried to put together the intro to go with the kind of the logo intro, and it just didn't work out tonight. So we'll have to see if YouTube will let us trim off the first couple minutes of the podcast tonight, and we'll kind of get into it. So thank you everybody for joining us, and I think that I'd like to maybe start with just a little bit of a retrospective here. That I think we've had woke culture with us now for a couple of different generations, and it basically is it's gotten kind of worse and worse, and has helped to turn upside down, right is wrong, up is down, and all that. But within the last 3 or 4 years, I mean, I'm a big believer that it was the Dylan Mulvaney Bud Light commercial that really kind of turned us more away from woke culture, and was kind of the beginning of the end for woke culture. And since then, we've kind of been on what I consider to be a bit of a renaissance as people. And I think we started to get our bearings straight again. We started to figure things out. We started to get back towards where we can actually live a life that is more masculine, more feminine, more Catholic, and all that. So that's kind of my opening salvo here. And I don't know if Ryan or William, you want to kind of give us your thoughts just to kick things off here.
Yeah. I don't know, Ryan, if you have anything you'd like to say first.
Go ahead. I'm gathering my thoughts.
Already. Well, as far as a retrospect, it feels like until November 5th, conservatives and, especially, Catholic conservatives were definitely on the back foot. We're definitely losing what we would call the culture war. Now, whether or not there were more actual, we've always been the silent majority, people, just supporting common sense and basic, decency and morality and even masculinity. Definitely the prevailing notion, the prevailing spin was that woke is the new in. Progressiveness is all the rage. DEI is the next big thing. All of media was pushing that very hard. All of entertainment in general, especially Western entertainment in general, has been pushing that very hard. And people, it felt like people were starting to believe it. You just didn't see, contrary voices. Again, until the last, several years, It's been rising, but I definitely feel like with the coming in of this new administration with several paragons of masculinity, I feel like we are definitely seeing a resurgence in conservatism, or of just common sense, and masculinity is definitely on the rise. We have retaken the initiative, and momentum, at least for the moment, is on our side.
So, Ryan, you got any initial thoughts you want to go put out there?
Yeah, my initial thoughts would just be, I don't think a couple of incidents a trend makes, and I would definitely have to see a lot more continued, I guess, incidents or particulars or specific instances of examples of masculinity, or uh, instances where it's portrayed properly or extolled or praised, or certainly practiced and embodied and enshrined and ultimately legislated. Color me pessimistic, but um, you know, uh, a couple of commercials don't a victory in the culture war make. I don't think so.
Yep.
But that's my immediate take on this. Like, it's hopeful. I like to see it. You want to see it, but
We haven't won yet.
we certainly haven't won.
We're heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to do here, and I've got some videos lined up to show tonight, and they're really good. This first one that we're going to show, it's actually a 15-minute video, and I'd like to kind of show the whole thing, and not just in isolation, but what I would say to both of you guys is, as we see things that deserve to be called out in this video, I'll go ahead and pause the video, and we'll show it. But it's from a guy named Brian Holdsworth, who he's Nova Scordo and Catholic, and of course he'll use a little bit of phraseology that's different than our phraseology in terms of talking about the Nova Scordo Church, but boy, he is really, really spot on in terms of what he has to say, and I think it's some good stuff for us to really build a conversation around. So let's go ahead and get that started.
When I was growing up, if you wanted to fit in, especially with like the zeitgeist, the cultural zeitgeist of the moment, positioning yourself as anti-Christian was an obvious thing to do. And by extension, to identify as pro-Christian or even as an actual Christian yourself, that was a sure way to be met with, well, social rejection. Now, that wouldn't have been universally true, I'm sure, in every place and every time, but certainly where I was growing up, that was absolutely the case. And it also meant that distinguishing yourself as an anti-Christian voice could be a lucrative accessory to like one's career, especially if you were like a performing artist of some kind. Acts like Marilyn Manson, Slayer, Rob Zombie, and plenty of others were able to, I would say, compensate for a lack of innovative musical talent by teasing satanic tendencies in their public image. I distinctly remember a band that
And I'm going to go ahead and jump in here and just say that I think that this goes back. He's going back, I think, to maybe the 2000s, the 1990s, perhaps, and I think you can go back quite a ways farther than that. Even when I was growing up as not a Christian, it was cool to be a non-Christian. And I think that there was maybe a little bit. I mean, you had some weird stuff in the 70s. Perhaps, which is a little bit before my time, but I think that even when I was growing up, this culture was already, if it wasn't already there, it was definitely already building. Oh, go ahead, William.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I feel like definitely, with the rise of hippie culture, in the '60s, and the Cultural Revolution, because of the revolution in the church, you definitely, because the church wasn't taken seriously anymore, because for one thing, it didn't take itself seriously anymore because it'd been corrupted. It was suddenly not the fact of being a Catholic suddenly had a lot less gravitas, had a lot less meaning, or a lot less weight behind it, and it became an easy target for discrimination, and for being the butt of all the jokes, especially with the rise of the hippie culture too in the 60s and 70s. But that's just my 2 cents on it.
That
right, let's go ahead
I was
and get
into
back to
as
it.
a teenager called Bad Religion, who among like the skate punk genre, which was the subculture I was embedded within, they were one of the few who broke through into the mainstream from time to time, and their logo was, and probably still is, simply a Latin cross with a strike through it, which, like, can you imagine such a sigil taking aim at any other recognizable group in the world? Imagine a Star of David or an Islamic crescent with a strike through it. Any band representing itself in this way would obviously get chased out of any respectable community because it's so obviously an expression of hatred for a recognizable group. But not only can you express that kind of hatred for Christianity, you, in this case, would be celebrated for it. It's a textbook example of Herbert Marcuse's theory of repressive tolerance, which is why I was somewhat mystified recently when someone shared a link to an Instagram page belonging to a black death metal band called Behemoth. Now, I was a bit of a metalhead prior to my conversion to Christianity, so I was familiar with Behemoth, but I was the kind of person who was in it for the music, man. I played guitar myself, and that's the kind of stuff I was into. And Behemoth was the kind of band you listen to less for the quality of the music and more for the associations they had with being scary and evil and, of course, satanic. But when I recently looked at their Instagram page, something was different. They were announcing some new album or something with the usual appropriation of Christian imagery, but instead of being rewarded for this tired formula of ridiculing Christianity and then portraying yourself as satanic and then cash checks, instead it would appear that they were getting cooked in the comments of their posts. In post after post, the most conspicuous comment was, "Christ is King!" exclamation mark, over and over again. And not only was it ubiquitous on their page, but it was also the most liked comment. And
Now I'm going to stop for just a minute, and I think this tells us that this move towards Christianity and towards the faith, towards Christ as King, has been building for a while. And I think that that's one of the things that kind of comes out in this video, is that even though Hollywood, even though the singing, the pop music, all these different social leaders or whatever you would call them, basically they were anti-Christ, they were pushing this anti-Christian message, but at the same time, I think bubbling up from below was a more pro-Christian message. I remember, one of the big turning points, at least publicly, was Tim Tebow. I didn't put an image down here, who was extremely openly Christian. And did the Tebow, basically scored a touchdown, did the Tebow kneel and pray, and so I think that you've actually kind of had things starting to shift here even before they've really manifested publicly. I don't know if either of you guys want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, you have figures like Candace Owens or other people who might have takes you agree with and takes you don't. But people like that who were who went publicly, Christ is King, and while they were booted from their initial job, or speculated at least, or a cause for Candace Owens getting the boot or leaving the Daily Wire was because of that. Her popularity for it and her grassroots audience loved it. And I'll go down comments of her videos sometimes, and I just see over and over again Christ is King, and very, very pro Christian sentiment. And it's not just Candace Owens, but it's others as well. But I feel like while the mainstream media and the business, the entertainment industry is still going full stop anti-Christian, as it always will until the day it dies, the audience, the consumers, are seeing through the messaging, are saying, okay, why is it so bad to be Christian? Why is it okay to be against Christianity and not Judaism? Why, if you say the word Jews can be bad, are you suddenly persona non grata? but you're rewarded for saying, Christians are evil. It's just people, the bigger the lie, the faster, it'll become uncovered. And, this is it is one of the biggest lies ever told. So I feel like as, it'll be a snowball kind of effect as more and more people see, that, Christianity actually isn't all that bad. And, it's, the truth, specifically Catholicism, then more and more people, get it, and it'll just become a snowball effect. But that's just, that's my take on it.
Okay. And I would also say that if you look at the official, there's still an official oppression of Christianity right now through especially Google, which is probably the worst. And Google, you can go out to Google and just type in, or AI. AI is really bad this way as well. That you can go out and type in, say something critical of Muhammad, say something critical of Abraham or the Jews, and you'll get like nothing. Say something critical of Christ, and just boom, 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 boom. And so there still is that out there. And then there's also the legacy media that is extremely anti-Christian and paid for by our tax dollars, we're finding out, through USAID and that whole scandal. But so, I mean, it's still out there and it's still extremely predominant, but I don't know how widely popular that real true anti-Christianity is. So, Ryan, did you want to pop in?
Well, yeah, sorry. I've been kind of thoughtfully reticent, I think. The gears turn a little slower these days. But especially considering the media, like, I can't help but contrast it with my own experience, like out in the society, right? So in the world, in work, that's where a man is typically going to encounter society, is this or that culture at work. And considering the terminology in its broadest terms, effeminacy versus masculinity, and plugging it into the widest context, I can't help but think that Christian or anti-Christian, Marilyn Manson or Christ is King, it's all rather superficial and more of a terminological thing or ideological. Like, it's easy. Like, it doesn't, it's on the surface. It's superficial. It doesn't impact, and it doesn't get down to it doesn't get down to the deep part, like where things are, where the motives come from. And it doesn't drive the end, because, masculinity is basically just the moral life of being a man, and effeminacy is the immoral life of being a human. It's not being a woman. That's maybe femininity, but that's not effeminacy. Effeminacy is cowardice. It's softness. Masculinity is the moral and even, you might say, the virtuous life of being a man, whereas and a woman has her own virtuous life being a woman, and that would be a courageous life as too. Prudence, justice, fortitude, temperament, the same for every human being. My experience with the world through work culture is that effeminacy rules supreme, because people are cowards and don't want to do the right thing, because to do the right thing requires suffering somewhat. And anyway, that's my take real quick.
Yeah, no, very, very good. We're going to get back into the
Imagine a band like Behemoth, who has been capitalizing on this whole anti-Christian shtick for, well, decades now. They were probably feeling slightly bewildered, like, are we suddenly out of touch with the teenage zeitgeist? Like I said, when I was a teenager or a young man, nobody would stand up for Christianity like this without getting mobbed by other commenters. But here was an unapologetically pro-Christian message that was simultaneously being celebrated by onlookers. So what's going on? What it suggested to me was that there's a cultural shift going on right now, that young men who are the target market for a band like Behemoth have grown disenchanted with pop culture's tendencies to denounce traditional values and Christianity more specifically. Not only were they fed up with it, but they were actually pushing back against it. And statistics seem to back up this anecdotal evidence. For as long as I've been Catholic, so 20 years now, one thing has been obvious to myself and anyone else paying attention, which is that women outnumbered men in the pews. But apparently now that's changing. According to a 2022 study by the think tank Cardis called The Shifting Landscape of Faith in Canada, since 2019 there has been a resurgence in faith in God, with young men leading the way. In just 2 years between 2020 and 2022, faith in God jumped for men under 35 from 46% to 56%. And according to a recent Statista survey, when baby boomers and Gen X were surveyed, women outnumbered men in religious representation, but the reverse is true for millennials and Gen Z. And right alongside this demographic shift, I think it's also interesting to note the increasing adversity that men are facing in society today. For example, men far outnumber women in representation in deaths of despair, like suicide or overdoses. Men are 8 times more likely to be incarcerated than women, and more likely to face stiffer sentences for the same crimes. Our entire education system seems to be designed to favor female strengths, as 2/3 of the top performing students in high school are girls, and 2/3 of the bottom performers, or those who are struggling the most, are male. Women are far more likely to acquire a college degree than men, with that gap only growing. 1 in 3 American men without a high school diploma are completely absent from the labor force. They're just not even there. They're not even collecting welfare. And while men, their earning potential has dropped since 1983, women's earning potential has increased by 33%. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I could go on and on with statistic after statistic. The more you go through the data, the more unavoidable is the conclusion that every possible disadvantage seems to be stacked against boys and men in today's world. And yet, in spite of those adversities, men are also routinely labeled toxic and privileged, and filling up and occupying spaces that should be surrendered to other vulnerable groups. In short, young men are getting the short end of the stick and simultaneously being gaslit in the process.
And I think this is an important point that this is really, and this is I guess it's a natural ebb and flow of our society, and something I didn't really expect. That you see these pictures of these little boys, and they're 4 or 5 years, it's kind of turned into a meme even, 4 or 5 years old, and they're told from day one, the day they get into kindergarten and first grade, you are the problem with the world. And especially if you're white, if you're a male, that and it's like, I didn't do anything wrong. What did I do? And these boys, and I think he gets into the host here gets into this, but these boys are going to grow up, and they're still going to have an instinct for the male instinct, right? To conquer, to achieve, to move forward, and they're going to have to. They're facing a hostile, a hostile world, and they're going to have to kind of work through how to make good with it.
And they aren't oblivious to this fact anymore. And here's the thing about this demographic, young men. When push comes to shove, especially when a situation might become like a little more primitive or desperate, like a crisis or a war, young men are the deciding factor, because they are the ones that fight and win wars. They are the ones that will tip the scales in conflict and crisis. And as absurd as it is that this needs to be explained, it's because they are the most physically capable demographic in the world. If distinctions between men and women's athletics are removed, virtually every world record is held by a man. And if you were to put the best male against the best female in the most popular Olympic sports, the male is going to win almost every time. And if he doesn't, it's an exception proving the rule. And if recognizing that fact makes a person sexist, then I'd rather be accused of being sexist than burying my head in the sand in order to convince myself of things that simply aren't true. And it isn't like women don't have notable and admirable strengths of their own. The fact that men and women are different means each has certain strengths and weaknesses that the other doesn't. And in the case of war and conflict, unfortunately for men, they are going to fare better, which is why every civilization throughout human history, men have been the driving force behind military victory and the field of battle, which is why it's a really, really bad and stupid idea for any civilization to treat their young men as second-class disposable citizens. At a certain point, their tolerance for that kind of treatment and even abuse is going to run out, and the consequences will be, at best, they won't help you when you need them the most, or worse, they'll become your adversary and push society in a direction it doesn't want to go, fueled by anger and resentment and vengeance. So the fact
I saw another video. I saw another video recently that basically picked up on this particular point. And it was really eloquent. And the guy in it said that basically society, these men are going to have two choices when they grow up and they realize that they've been brainwashed. They realize that they've been gaslit and told that they're the problem with the world. Basically, they're going to figure it out, and there's going to have two options. One is they're going to respond properly to people like us, podcasts like ours, the priest, the Catholic faith, tradition, goodness, all those kind of things, political conservatism, whatever it is. And they're going to realize that they've been basically sold a bill of goods, and they're going to just realize, okay, life kind of sucks, but let's put our heads down and let's get through it, right? The other option is that they're going to turn on their oppressors, okay? And that's going to get really extremely ugly if that happens. And the oppressors had better hope that they choose our way and not the way of the oppressors. So I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I would say there's a little bit of a third option that hasn't been possible through the rest of history, but that would be docility. And this is going to be, the minority of people, but because of, for one, as we discussed last week, the food we're eating, the general state of health, the general state of mental health, and all the years and years and years of brainwashing, men, they might realize that, yeah, we've kind of been lied to, and, we are oppressed, but if I don't do anything, then it'll be easier. And just kind of, sloth, and laziness has become so predominant in our society specifically, that you'll have a decent amount of people who just, they'll go back to their video games, and they'll eat the bugs, live in the pods, and be happy. I think that is definitely the minority, because that is against our nature, it is against the nature of man. But to a certain extent, I think the brainwashing has been successful for a decently large amount of young men, that they will live in the pods and be happy and just do what they're told, even if they know that what they're being told is a lie. As long as it's a comforting lie, they'll go along with it.
So in my experience, sorry, I thought I was cutting you off, William.
Oh no,
echo.
Oh no, I was done. Perfect timing.
In my experience, there is a dichotomy between what people say and think and what they do. And it's been a long series of very disappointing experiences to confirm me in my perspective that what we're seeing is a superficial, effeminate kvetching about the state of things, which is precisely another symptom of the moral bankruptcy and ultimate lack of true courage to do anything about it. And as far back as when I was like 10 years old, and in my elementary school, they said, you're not allowed to go to the bathroom anymore this week. And everyone complained about it, and the only one to do anything about it was me, and I had to stand alone. And it was really unfortunate. Is the echo only on my side, or can everyone else hear that?
No, you're good. Your voice is not real loud, but it's clear.
I can adjust that. Anyway, so I don't want to be like the pessimist here. I would have to see a lot of things change, because ultimately what I think is, sorry, I'm responding to my own echo here. What I think this man we're listening to is overgeneralizing off of a couple of social media instances, because ultimately there is an entire culture of degenerate men who've been morally compromised and can't muster true courage to do anything because they have a guilt hanging over their head because they've just been bankrupted morally. The younger generation is kind of strongly reacting against the effeminacy and saying no to porn and no to, well, they're saying no to actually a lot of other things, kind of overreacting. But I don't know. I'd have to wait to see the ascendancy of the Zoomers, and if their energy is diverted toward the goals of more nefarious individuals. I want to be hopeful, but I'm not
quite there. Yeah, and I think that's what we're seeing here is basically we're seeing a trends, you know, and early trends, and I'd have to say, Ryan, I mean, you're right. We've got a very, very deep hole to dig out from. But I think what we're seeing in this video, and certainly I think it's consistent with what I believe, is that we're at least we've got maybe the green, we call it the green shoots. Doesn't mean that the lawn's going to grow in and choke out the weeds, but at least we've got a little bit of hope to get started.
At least at this point, are taking a positive step and turning to God. That's a really encouraging sign, because all of the strengths that young men possess, if it can be channeled properly, it's a highly valuable asset for society. But if it's channeled poorly, it becomes a massive liability. In simple terms, when men are good, a society will prosper in really important ways. But when men go bad, it's really bad for a society. And in my own personal experience,
And yeah, I think to your point, Ryan, I mean, we can blame women, we can blame you know, the feminist movement, and that's certainly been a big part of it. But I think that you're right there, because men have failed, because men have become effeminate, because men have, you know, checked out, whatever it is, yeah, I think that's why we are in the mess that we're in right now. And I think that I, you know, definitely have to agree with you on that.
Teachings of the church are the best way to channel the strengths that lie in masculinity. Because here's the thing, we've all heard a million times before that life isn't fair, right? And no amount of complaining or resentment or envy will offset that fact. In this life, you will see people do evil things and seemingly be rewarded for it, and you will see people play by the rules and be taken advantage of for it. So if this life is all you get, then it sucks. There isn't much actual hope to be accessed. Just pie in the sky optimism and like political slogans that ultimately leave us feeling manipulated. But what if your suffering has a purpose? What if the apparent injustices that you experience will eventually be remedied somehow after, especially in the kind that young men are experiencing today? What if it's an antidote to not only the injustices we experience from others, but to our own broken tendencies? Because while it's easy to recognize how others have wronged us, we also have to admit that we've wronged other people as well. We've all experienced guilt and shame for our own actions, our own shortcomings. And if we're justified for resenting the way that we've been mistreated, then we should also be justified in resenting our own actions as well. And our own suffering can then appear as an antidote and a source of ultimate hope to replace the resentment. Because just think about this for a second. Imagine a person who goes through their life harming other people, lying, stealing, cheating, manipulating, all to their advantage, and every night they go to sleep without any measure of distress for their behavior, and nothing ever upsets them as they journey through this immoral life. Wouldn't you and I, observing a life like that, think something bad needs to happen to this guy? We intuitively know that negative consequences and suffering are an appropriate consequence for that kind of conduct, right? Well, if we are all honest about our own lives and our own behavior, we would have to admit that we've all betrayed our own standard of morality countless times, probably daily even. I know I have. So our own suffering, if we're being honest, isn't without merit. And Christianity comes along and says that not only is it appropriate, but it's salvific. Jesus says that whoever wants to follow him has to take up his own cross, embrace his own instrument of torture, and be willing to lay down his life, to lose his life, forsake whatever expectations you have in this life, and then you will gain it all and more in the next life. If that isn't true, then hope is an irrational, nonsensical trait. But if that is true, that's the only possible kind of hope we can have. And this is especially true for men. The masculine vocation, according to Christianity, is to be willing to suffer on behalf of others, the way that Jesus did. That's the specific calling of men. Effeminacy is the unwillingness to suffer for some good end. Women, by contrast, are called to obedience as a consequence of the fall, and we see this exemplified in the example of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Men are called to lay down their lives for others, especially their wives, according to the example of Jesus, and this is explicitly taught in Ephesians 5. It's why we can't help but admire men who sacrifice themselves as heroic. Think about the men who stayed on the Titanic, bravely facing a horrific end so that women and children could escape. Think about all the men who have fought and died in the countless wars of history so that others could be spared that horror. If such sacrifices didn't weigh in the balance sheet of eternal life, then our admiration wouldn't make any sense. It would be irrational. They suffered and died without any benefit to themselves. Why would we admire that? But if their sacrifices somehow contribute to balancing the scales of ultimate justice and fulfilling our calling as men, then it makes perfect sense for us to admire them. And of course, we do admire them. All of the great stories we love to tell of heroic self-sacrifice, like in movies like Braveheart and The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and on, make sense only in that light. There's a reason these stories connect to our deepest understanding of ourselves and the ultimate purpose of our lives. So my hope is that young men today will make the best of a difficult situation, that they will not only continue to turn to faith in God, but turn to the church as well, and that the church will be poised and ready to receive them, which I fear it isn't in the case at the moment. The church has a distinctly effeminate.
Now, I'm going to show a comment here. I want to kind of break in, and he's almost done. The last thing I'd like to say to a man, especially a younger man who's going through hell, is by golly, your suffering has a purpose. You have to give someone a promise to something good in the interim. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely truth in that. Now, granted, there are going to be times when, I mean, you look at, I don't know if you've watched the intro, the lead in, we call it the pregame. The first part of it taken from the movie For Greater Glory, where, you know, the young man there, he suffered from beginning to end, and then he ended up dying in the end. Of course, his reward would have been great in heaven. And so I think that there is no guarantee that we're going to have things better in this life. And although I think what I can say, and let me kind of kick this over to William and Ryan to see what you guys think here. But if we are behaving like men and we are going through hell, we're going through tough times. It's kind of funny. We did this show today, and I had like 7 or 8 different things, and they were all, you know, minor in the big picture of things, but pipes freezing, stuff going haywire at work, and all this kind of stuff going on the last couple of days. And what you got to do as a man, you put your head down and you fight through it. That is manliness. That, to me, at least, that is masculinity, is the idea that when things are tough, we just put our heads down and we get through it. Now let me kick that over to the other guys because I'm doing too much of the talking here.
So I really am beginning to appreciate what this man whose video we're watching is talking about, and I'm glad he's a Catholic because it just helps. And he's actually kind of getting to what I was talking about. everyone is called to virtuous life, and boys are boys and girls are girls, but we're all supposed to be moral. And when we're not moral, it brings great evil. Now, we can't even be naturally good without being supernaturally good. So, having natural virtue is extremely difficult in the absence of something like baptism. But in the West, we are so thoroughly vitiated by sin, especially, I'd say, lust and pornography, that it just rips out any possibility of any kind of even natural virtue. And this has been happening for generations. And I think there's a lot of causes, and it's generational, it's behavioral, and it's ultimately predicated on the lack of sanctifying grace, the evil of mortal sin, and just bad example, and the loss of any kind of impact in your society because you've lost any courage, because you no longer have grace.
Yeah, that gets into an interesting another interesting kind of a side note is how did the natives of certain countries become so primeval, so primal, and why did they as a society degenerate to the point of beating each other with sticks and things like that, just absolute base societies that never advanced. I believe it was Bishop Sanborn had a sermon on this, and the answer is because as a society, at some point they gave into sin, and they lost grace, they lost their natural grace, and essentially, to a certain degree, God pretty much abandoned them to their sins. The cup of the chalice of their chalice overflowed with sin, and so they were suddenly without divine inspiration of any sort, and so they kind of they digressed, and they became just base and with only the most basic level of society. And to a degree, I think you really saw that starting to happen to us. Is our things that would have seen as basic, things that would have been seen as natural virtues just 50 years ago aren't today, and they still aren't, although I believe we do see a a um, a fight against it, a very large fight against it. But the very fact that we are having to declare from the from the president that there are only two genders says that we have fallen very far from grace, and because of that, just our intellect and our sense of nature and our sense of society has just had begun to crumble, and even now still is crumbling in many different facets of society. But that's just my little tangent for that.
No, I agree, William. This echo is killing me here. I'm so sorry. Anyway,
We don't hear it, so it's
Oh.
no problem here.
good. Then I'm going to power. You know what? I'm going to be masculine and have virtue and courage, and I'm going to power through this
There you go.
obstacle of an echo that's making me think I'm crazy. So I agree, William. I really want to talk to this e-Catholic too. I can't respond in the chat, and I don't know if he's coming from his own perspective or representing young men. But it's true. It's very easy. It's easier said than done to say, just embrace the suffering, suck it up, and get through it. But and there's a certain kind of machismo that says like embrace the suck. Well, true in a certain sense. It's not the whole story at all. It's part of the context, right? You don't just suffer. You have to pray. And through prayer, as St. Alphonsus tells us, it's an infallible means of getting the grace we need to power through whatever it is we have to suffer. And my echo sidetracked me, but I want to say I agree with William. I want to talk to you Catholic too. And when the entire society has accepted a completely degenerate culture, we're not going to see brave, virtuous men in positions of authority anywhere. And that's a problem.
Yeah, but to a little bit to the contrary, as I do believe, I mean, largely our culture and society is, bereft of courage and, basic bravery. But I do think that, there are, of course, holdouts. There are quite a few different holdouts. And they're starting to, get larger. They're starting to show more. It's starting to become more in the public view, in the zeitgeist, to be brave. I mean, because this, people losing positions because they declared Christ as king, and for coming out against, for coming out against these debaucheries, and people, getting death threats and all these kinds of different, abuse from the degenerates for calling out the degeneracy. So I think there is a degree of courage out there. It's still very much in the minority, but I do believe that it is on the rise. But just from then again, I do tend to be more optimistic. But that's just from what I see, on social media. There is a disgust. There is a growing disgust with cowardice, and while there is most definitely still cowardice, that it is starting to be seen as cowardice and being called out as wrong. Whereas before, until even still now to some degree, but until recently, cowardice and a lack of bravery wasn't seen as wrong. It wasn't really seen as much of anything. But now you're seeing more of a call to bravery, even if the bravery itself isn't really there yet. But I personally think that things are turning in that direction, albeit even if it's slowly.
And let me go ahead and let's finish out. We got about 1 minute left in this video, and he actually calls out the Minnesota Church, which is interesting here.
The effeminate quality at this moment in history. So I would say we need to focus on as much attention on reforming and remedying that fact. And if you're a young man, perhaps consider that a challenge to join us in the effort of reforming the church, in restoring its currently lacking masculine character. Okay, thanks for watching.
Right, so hair all of a sudden changes there at the very end.
Yeah.
So
now that we've gotten to the end of it.
Yeah, so that was the end of it. And he does call the church out for being basically effeminate these days. And we want to try to bring back masculine characteristics too. And I would say that is really a big part of what got us into the mess we're in today. Excuse me there. Was that Vatican II kind of feminized the clergy, and they started wearing stupid vestments and turned around and talked to or prayed to the congregation, didn't pray to God. I think to a large extent they lost their authority, they lost their calling. If you go out and watch videos, and we were talking about this the other day. In fact, this is a really interesting that there's the G.K. Chesterton, wrote a series of books, the Father Brown Mysteries, and there's a remake that we've been watching the last few nights, very recent, and the bearing of Father Brown is very much a 2010 2020s Novus Ordo type of a priest. He just doesn't have the bearing. He doesn't have the authority that you would have had in times past. And it really kind of is this, I don't know. I mean, I like to say effeminate, but it just presents kind of a poor vision of the priesthood.
Yeah, and yeah, for sure. And it's another thing is, I think I mentioned this earlier, but that the church has just, it's lost all of its practical authority. It has no gravitas or weight on the minds of its adherents. So 21% of America identifies as Catholic. I think about 21%. So a lot of America, it identifies as Catholic. I think less than 10, or probably about 10%. I'm just pulling these numbers up, but I know that it's very, very low. But so roughly 10% actually are practicing Catholics. They go to mass every Sunday, and they believe everything that the church teaches. It's just because the church became effeminate and lost its sense of purpose and dignity, and well, it just ceased to become the actual Catholic Church from Vatican. It became so easy to just disregard the church, and that's why it became easier than ever for the secular world to demonize the church and just get away with it totally.
Right.
So at the end of that video, he contrasted two things. He contrasted masculinity and effeminacy, and that's a proper contrast. However, I do believe he had some mixed concepts there, and I'd like to I don't want to say deconstruct, but distinguish properly between these things. I think there is a tendency to conflate effeminacy with femininity, and that's not correct. And masculinity is not necessarily the same as maleness. Broadly, you could say that it is, but in the true context of human existence, it's not. Masculinity is the virtuous maleness. Femininity is a virtuous femaleness. Effeminacy is a vice opposed to courage, right? To perseverance. And fortitude is the virtue to do the arduous good. And that's kind of it's one of the characteristic traits of manliness, right? Well, our courageous female saints were not effeminate. They were feminine. They were true women. They were true virtuous women. They were not effeminate. They were not cowardice. They weren't cowards. They weren't cowardly. They weren't weak. They were strong. I'm kind of a wait, Eli. Let me turn up this volume. I'll work on that. So I'd like to just bring about the proper distinctions here. So to be brave in the simplest approach to Christianity would be to start fasting, to deprive yourself of natural goods like food, water, sleep. That's why we fast. We suffer a little bit. And virtue grows from there. So I just wanted to contribute that, because I feel like we need to build upon the proper foundation with the right distinctions.
Yeah, and go ahead. I'm sorry I cut you off there, Ryan.
I'd be repeating myself. Just he conflated a few things, and I want to distinguish properly.
Yeah. No, and I agree totally on the point of, I know. Okay, and I'm going to call out Father Philip here. We kind of thought about asking Father Philip on the show tonight, our son, and we just didn't ask him, but he had a sermon not too long ago, and he basically made the point of try to do something that's of a sacrificial nature like that, and just something small. Get up 15 minutes early from before work or before you go to mass or whatever it is, and exercise. And I took that to heart, and I decided, okay, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna wake 15 minutes earlier than I usually do, and I'm gonna spend that time. I'm gonna do some exercise. I'm gonna try to do a little bit of stretching, and try to get ready for the day and do something constructive. And by golly, if I haven't missed the sleep, I'm in better condition. I'm probably kind of sleeping better at night, and it's been a big help. But it starts, like you say, it's with that little bit of denial that really starts to build a foundation. And I think where we are right now is, and what we've seen this in the comment a little bit, that that men have gotten accustomed. I mean, they're doing porn and they're doing all kinds of things that are the exact opposite of self-sacrifice. It's self-indulgence, and I think that trying to switch out that self-indulgent, culture for a more self-sacrificial one is kind of at the core of what we're about here.
Yeah. And also, I think as a kind of a part of that, that so many, I'd say most definitely the majority of young men don't have today, is a sense of purpose. And while as Catholics, we know what our purpose is. Our purpose is to get to heaven. But for most Christians, for most young men, they don't have a sense of earthly purpose. And I think even plenty of Catholics don't have a sense of earthly purpose. Is they have no goals, they have nothing to strive for, nothing to push or challenge themselves for. And that's, I mean, it might be another symptom, but it also might be a cause of for self-denial and mortification are so immensely important. But there needs to be some kind of reason for that, because we are flesh and blood creatures, but and we need tangible motives, we need tangible reasons to suffer through these things. So to a point that eCatholic 2 made some time ago, is that we need, if we are suffering, and life is suffering, if you're living too easy of a life, then you better worry about the state of your soul. But suffering has a purpose, and we need to make it have a purpose, even if it is for this life. Of course, for set your highest goal is heaven. Is this getting me closer to heaven? Is this getting me closer to God? But next, we need we need tangible goals. Whether I'm going to lose 10 pounds, I'm going to lose 15 pounds. That is a goal of mine. But we need to have something to hold on to struggle through, to strive through, a reason for the suffering. And that's something that so many young men especially, but people in general, they have nothing to fight for, and so they don't fight. They have no reason to be courageous, so they're cowardly. And they have been pervaded by, and I think social media has so much to do with this, is there is no sense of purpose. And so people just, they never meet their true potential that they could have had, and they wither on the vine. And it's so sad to see, but I think that it's a big problem. And an immensely important thing to do is set goals and have a purpose.
Yeah, let me share a see if this works. Um, it looks like we don't have the sound for it. Well, yeah, basically this is a 350,000 young Polish Christians in the streets chanting Poland is Catholic, and I think that there, and I mean this like looks like wartime and all that, but I think that you have these hang on a second, let me see if I can move that over there. Okay. Yeah, I'm not getting the sound, but anyways, yeah. So you are seeing around the country where things are starting to come around, and you're seeing in some countries at least, where at least like you said, William, we know there's a problem, we know there's something we need to work on, and you're starting to see, I think, the fruits of people at least trying to get their act together.
I was just going to say, yeah, to that point is, we are hardwired. We have always been hardwired to to have a God to worship God. We were made to worship God. Um, And so and everyone has that drive to have a higher purpose. Everyone has it somewhere in their mind. They feel like they have to have that there is a higher purpose. It's just and it's the devil and the world and the flesh that corrupts that and makes us see other things as that purpose. And so while and because of the modern society and purpose being taken away recently from so many people, people are finding other reasons, and it's just most of them don't have they're not finding the right reasons. They're not finding their purpose, and so they're turning to degeneracy. They're turning deeper into degeneracy, and to all the making money their god, making fame and wealth and clicks on YouTube or clicks on TikTok their god, their purpose. And it's just the need of us to try to get these people to find the true purpose, to find even a better purpose for their life, for their struggles. And that's just something that is currently, it is still just so lacking in our society.
Yep. Ryan, did you want to pop in there?
I'm just thinking.
Okay, well, let me go.
I also
want
to respond to Scott Caleb.
Yeah, go ahead. In fact, that's what I was going to do as well. Yeah.
I can't help but think that there's a false dichotomy there, Scott. Like, work is not a curse. Man was made to work. And in our current fallen state, there's going to be some suffering. But a man's life is mostly spent working. And for it to just be awful for, 40, 50 years, that's not okay. Like, it's a false dichotomy. We should work. We have to work. It's part of our state. It's what we were made for. But it doesn't have to suck. Excuse my language. It doesn't have to be a real drag. Like, there's pain, there's exhaustion, but those can be good things. God gave us talents, and He wants us to use them. Now, in the current society we live in, work is tedious and annoying, and big bureaucratic culture was built on top of it. But it's a big problem we have to unpack. But anyway, I don't.
Hey,
there's nothing.
I'm gonna take a couple minute break here and go send a link off to Father. Father's going to try to join. So, but go ahead, Ryan. Why don't you keep on?
Oh no, that's all. I just think there's a false dichotomy there. Like, work doesn't have we don't have to be miserable. That's not our calling in life, is to be miserable at work for 50 years. That's all.
Yeah, and I think there is definitely, not everyone enjoys their job. I mean, you should try to enjoy your job. You should try to find ways to enjoy your job. If you don't, if you hate what you're doing, maybe if it's possible to find a different job that you do enjoy, even if it's marginally more. So, you shouldn't try to make such a big part of your life like Ryan said, a misery. And I think, we can all do little things, even if it's seemingly small, to make our daily duties more enjoyable, even if it is, if we are holy enough, and we should all strive to be holy enough to make the knowledge that what we are doing is getting us closer to heaven should help to make our daily duties happy. That's, the little way of Saint Teresa, is just sanctifying your daily duties, even if you don't naturally enjoy it, even if it doesn't come naturally to you. It's to know that the purpose that you're doing it for is so worth it that it should become a joy. Now, I know that most people won't reach that. Many people won't reach that level of sanctity, but it should be something that we all strive to attain. Is that the sanctification of our workplace should make it a joy, at least in a sense.
Yeah, and I'll just say real quick, and Father, welcome aboard. Nice to have
Hello,
you here.
thank you.
Let me go ahead and make a quick point on what Scott was saying here, and I think he's right on in the sense that we are taught worldliness. We are taught, it's kind of this Disney idea of everything should be about gratifying me, and it should all be about worldly happiness, and I can be anything I want to be, and all that. And really, to find true happiness, I think, is to find purpose that is in, sometimes it's the mundane, sometimes it's the difficult, but it is in, it is in a higher purpose. So, Father, are you ready to give some thoughts here?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for letting me join the conversation. And I missed the first about 40 minutes of the conversation, but I heard the last bit here. Do you want me to address the last point you were just
Sure.
talking about, or something more general?
No, well, whatever works.
Okay. Well, just a couple thoughts. And I've been following along with the comments here a little bit, and addressing some of the points that eCatholic 2 brought up. I think there's a lot to be said here for us as Catholics to remember that we need to be an example to others. We can talk to people, and that has value for those who want to listen. I mean, that's why we're doing this, right? I mean, it's not just about glorifying ourselves, it's about helping people. There is a point to talking to people, but more important than that is the example that we give. And we can tell people, well, look at the example of the people on the Titanic, or as the example was made before. And for some people that have noble ideals and everything, that's something that can be like, yeah, you're right. We can tell people about examples of people being self-sacrificing and dying for their country or dying for their family. And that can be beneficial for some people. But for most men, they're going to be most impressed by example. What do you do? Okay, you talk about being a Catholic, you talk about having high ideals, you talk about being a true man, but you don't act that way. And I think that's so much of what made Christianity, Catholicism, same thing, grow in the early centuries, is that you had a pagan world that was steeped in vices, innumerable vices, all focused just on the material world, no thought of what came beyond, and misled by their false guides, their false teachers, their false ideals. And it was a barbaric era. It was a barbaric time. You had the great civilization of Rome and Greece and everything else, but side by side with so much depravity. And then Christianity comes along, and you have these Christians that are downtrodden and persecuted, and you see them accepting that with bravery and with charity and with humility and zeal and everything. So that example is what made Christianity grow so much. And that's, in a large part, that's where we are today. There has to be good, strong men, virtuous men, to give that good example, to say, well, I mean, you can live for the here and now, just the now, the gratification now, or you can get what you can out of this world that is moral and good, and get something out of the sufferings and crosses and hardships you're going through as well, and attain eternal life. And if we have a strong faith, if we have a strong hope and a strong charity, then that will become apparent in our behavior. And men will we respond more to example than just an idea or words, because so often those words are just empty.
So Father, I think one of the questions that came up earlier, and I think we've been trying to muddle through, and are grateful to have a priest here, is what do you say to the younger generation of men, or young men? It could be, in many cases, they might be even 12, 13, 14 years old, or just coming into adulthood. They've been told since the beginning that they're the problem with the world. They're confused as to who they are. They're trying to find their way in the world, and they have no faith. What do you tell these men to try to get them just pointed in the right direction?
I think the first thing I would say is discipline. Discipline yourself. Self-discipline leads to success. There are things that are out of your control, and there are things that are in your control. And the things that are out of your control, you can't control it. You can't do anything about it. And many times that will make you unhappy. But if you have control of yourself, if you have mastery of yourself, then you have freedom. You are a free man if you have mastery of yourself. You can be in chains. You can be a prisoner or a slave. But if you have possession of your soul, you're not a slave anymore. You're still a free man in that sense. Now, that's taking it to an extreme here, but that's not something we're dealing with too much here. But I think it's so important to stress self-discipline. That self-discipline will give you more contentment than self-gratification in the short term, but especially in the long term. And I think this gets to the core of the matter of what manliness means. The way I see it and the way I want to explain it to men is look at the word virtue. It comes from the Latin word, virtus, which comes from the Latin word vir, which is man. To be a man, a true man, is to be virtuous. You can't be a true man unless you are virtuous. And that's an ancient understanding of that word, of that meaning. So I think if you want to be manly, it means to be virtuous. And sure, working out and being strong and buff, sure, there's virtues of perseverance and hard work and self-discipline that come in there. But, that pales in comparison with the virtues of humility and charity and others. And to be a real man means you have worked on and developed these virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, and others. So I think that's the core of the issue, is virtue. And that only comes, again, through self-discipline.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Wayne. I was going to say, I think that gets us a little bit into the lost art, the lost idea of chivalry, of kind of virtue in practice, of manliness in practice. Something, very idealized, especially, throughout the Middle Ages and throughout even, for most of the Renaissance, even in the good old South of the Confederate States of America, which we won't get into here, but is that the, chivalry, and just sense of chivalry, doing the small acts of kindness, putting others before yourself. One of the core principles of chivalry is that you come last. You come last. It's others before yourself, and of course, that doesn't mean don't take care of yourself. But it's that, especially, like the example of the Titanic, the women and the children come first. God comes first, country comes first, and then I myself come last. And that's, something that's been not just lost, but demonized, vilified, and, totally turned on its head in the past century. Is now it is all about, it's the Ordo Amoris that St. Thomas Aquinas, that I only know about because of J.D. Vance, actually. But that aside, is that the order of love has been completely switched. It's me, and then the world, and then my neighbor, and then my family, then my neighbor, God and country somewhere way down at the bottom. And that's, I think, a fundamental problem that has crept in, especially since Vatican II, but even before that.
Well, then it would speak to what our Lord said about, if anyone wishes to find his life, he must lose it. If anyone loses his life, he shall find it. That death to self brings about virtue, or growth and whatever. But yeah, the points you made there, William, were good, and I would add that with the sense of justice, one of those virtues, prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, so those cardinal virtues. With the sense of justice comes not only respect of others, but proper respect for yourself as well. So, to be a man doesn't mean that you always have to get in a fight with somebody, but it does mean that you have respect for other people, and that somebody can disrespect you, and you know that you deserve better. You know that you deserve better, but humility comes in and prudence comes in and tells you, well, I don't need to get in a fist fight with somebody, but I know my worth. God knows my worth, but I'm not going to let it ruin me, because then I'm giving into this a victimhood, and I'm giving into this other stuff that isn't going to help me or help anyone. So I don't know. There's a lot to it. I just thought I had with what you were saying there.
Well, Father, I appreciate your input, and it echoes pretty much what I was saying a little bit earlier. We can't talk about man if we're not talking about virtue.
Yeah.
Can't talk about any other virtue if we're not talking about kind of the primary conquering of self, right? And we have to subordinate our lower passions to our reason, and we do that by fasting. And so we have to slowly learn to conquer ourself, our lower passions, our emotional life. I've got one of the I got up briefly to look. I can't. My books got rearranged. I looked up one of the Father Fahey books, and in it, he has a lot of really helpful little diagrams. And in one of the one on Christ the King, I believe it starts out with showing man's reason and subordinating his emotional life and subordinating his lower passions, and all this is kind of like into a hierarchy of what it means to be man. And if we don't have those fundamental pieces in place, because even the ancients, as you said, Father, have that same understanding of the virtuous life as necessary, that self-mastery. Everything else like chivalry or any other kind of higher level term that subsumes lesser concepts, or not lesser concepts, but lower concepts, which would be more fundamental concepts, is going to look like a charade or some sort of it's going to be lacking, because it
doesn't have a foundation.
It's going to go to the superficial rather than the fundamental. It's going to focus on the appearances of chivalry, right? So then it's going to
Right.
not denigrate. It's going to get down to the appearances. Then it's going to become like a caricature of real masculinity, which is just going to be machismo. It's going to be the appearances rather than the fundamentals. So it's going to be the big, jacked beefcake,
right?
Who whines when he stubs his toe, rather than like the ascetic, who, can't be flapped by anything,
Right.
even if his arms are skinny. That's a really strong man right there, and probably he's also incredibly physically strong, the ascetic.
Let me go ahead and I get this question from Allie here, and any thoughts on how mothers or just parents in general can help foster true masculinity in their sons? And I having been the one who's been full cycle on raising children and raised them very masculine. Thank you very much, William, and Dominic's not here tonight, but we'll declare victory on that front. And I don't give myself credit. I think Lisa's the one that did it. But I would say first and foremost, if you have young boys especially, they need to achieve, they need to conquer, but they need to have their focus on pleasing God first. They need to please God first. They need to please their parents second. They need to please their friends third. And I think that that was probably the thing that Lisa did that was, over and above everything else, was to learn to have a God-centered orientation. And we sent our first couple of kids to school, and Kevin and Father Philip, and we sent them off to Omaha, and we had a couple of people come back and say, how is it your boys come in, they're such leaders, and I think that's part of being masculine. But I think that was the answer, was that we did not allow them to become peer dependent growing up. We made sure that they were always first and foremost trying to please God, which means that basically it's virtue, it's knowing right from wrong, and it's that old saying that what you do in private is really the truest measure of who you are. And I know worldlings are like, whoa, that's too much for me. But I think when you're truly Catholic and you're raised correctly, that's the truest measure. What am I doing when I'm in private and nobody else can see, but only God alone? Those moments are more important, really, than even the ones that we have with other people.
So true. Well, I'm not a parent, but I've taught boys, and I've helped out in the boarding school, etc. And with that, and with the knowledge of human nature, I would say have them work hard and play hard.
Mm-hmm.
Have them work hard and play hard. They need to be taught to work, doing things that are unpleasant to them, that will teach them self-discipline, and also the satisfaction that comes from completing a task, from doing some good, especially if you give them stuff that it's very satisfying, once they've accomplished it. So that is something, as you were saying, we want a quest. We want something to do and achieve and conquer or whatever. And even if it's a small task, if you teach them that, they learn that they can get gratification, not just in doing what they want now, but in a goal, in achieving a goal. So work hard and have them play hard. Make sure they have fun. Boys want to have fun, and there's nothing wrong with that. Boys think there's a lot in the education system that, sure, it teaches them to sit still and study, but they can accomplish more in a shorter time if they're allowed to run around more. That's just the way the boys are. So have them play hard, have them work hard, and that will take care of a lot of the problems and develop in them a lot of good qualities that can be. And that point you made about pleasing God all the time, even if you're alone, that is so huge. And that goes to everything we're talking about here with manliness and everything, is why you do something. As Ryan was saying earlier, we are not just animals. We're spiritual beings. We have body and soul, and we have to use our intellect. We have to use our reason, and that has to override our emotions. And boys need to be taught this. Everybody needs to be taught this, but boys especially, because they're going to be faced with a lot of problems here, and they need to be they need to be good examples of men. And why you're doing something is so important. So your intention, huge. Was such a good point you made.
Thank you, Father.
Yes. So Ryan William, you want to? Father and I are dominating the discussion here. You guys want to pop in? Anything here?
Well, I had a thought, and I'm sure it was very, very profound. And because it was so profound, it just went over my mind.
Yeah.
You're so humble there, William. My goodness.
It's one of my best qualities.
You could have told us that it was so profound we weren't worthy of it. So.
I'm the most.
Oh, right.
Okay, so let me go back to this one, E-Catholic 2, to ask and teach them that they are to have a vocation, move out at 18, 19, 20 if they live at home. They're in college, trade school. And yeah, I think that's very true. Oops, let me take that down. That was really our philosophy growing up, is we did treat boys and girls very differently in that sense. And by the time you were 18, 19, 20, you were working towards a vocation of some sort, right? And a couple of the boys, it took a little bit of time to kind of get into it, maybe 18, 19, 20 or whatever. The girls, we actually never expected them to. Now, a couple of them did move out, but we never expected them to move out on their own. If they wanted to stay at home and be, live the single life or whatever it is, we would have suffered. And I mean, we would have accommodated that. But with the boys, yeah, by the time you're 18, 19, 20, you need to be on to a vocation. You need to be, either religious, or you need to be working on becoming a provider for a family. So yeah, no doubt about that.
I think it gets to a point that I've come to realize a bit more these last couple of years, is just the way that if your regular education system, your regular K through 12, and you graduate and you're 18 and then you start working, there's such that, to me, I've seen such an issue with this if it's not joined with a good work ethic and long-term thinking that the parents need to instill in their boys, when they're teenagers, when they're 14, 15, 16, 17, because I think there's too much in our culture today of treating teenagers, especially teenage boys, when they're 15, 16, 17, like babies. And it teaches them to be babies. Like, it teaches them to be kids when they're 18, and then they graduate high school and they want to keep being kids. They want to keep being little boys. And they're not taught that work ethic. That's not instilled in them that, hey, by the time you're 18, you could actually be working, a trade or something like that, if not making decent money, at least on your way to being able to be able to provide for family by the time you're 21, 22, 23. There's a lot of with our modern system, there's sometimes people that get married when they're 21 and they're not able to handle it because they haven't been taught to grow up when they're 15 years old. So I think there's such an issue there that I've seen. And on the reverse, the flip side of it, if parents can instill this in their boys when they're 14, 15, they can be really hard workers, really disciplined, and have a plan, or at least have some actionable goals by the time they graduate at 18, and aren't behind and grow up when they're 28 and realize, well, now I need to get it together. It really slows them down, really slows down their development, I think.
Yeah, and one thing I would add here is that I grew up Southern California in the early 1970s. What could possibly go wrong, right? And it was the beginning of the self-esteem generation, and so basically, teachers didn't really treat us truthfully, but it was kind of the beginning of where they just told you were wonderful whether you were or weren't, and so by the time that whole culture had really matured, it was probably the mid 2000s or 2010s or whatever, and I was working in school district at that point, and we got to the point where our children, United States children, they would take math tests, standardized math tests, and they would take the same math test as as most other countries in the world. And our students had the worst scores, or among the worst scores in the entire world. But then when they were asked how they did, they were ranked number one. And so they thought they were wonderful and awesome, and it's just something else. And they weren't. And I think that's one of the things with boys especially, is that boys are going to develop the sense when they accomplish something, they know it. And I mean, it's good to give them positive feedback, but at the same time, what boys need from you is honesty, and a lot of times it's going to be brutal honesty. And I don't know that necessarily that's best coming from the dad, but what I grew up and had a male role model, a high school baseball coach who was just absolutely brutally loving, but brutally honest in his the way he disciplined. And that helped me tremendously to become the man I was, because when I accomplished something, I knew it, and I knew I didn't need that feedback from anybody else. I didn't want to be lied to. I didn't want to be told I was wonderful when I wasn't. I just wanted to be treated truthfully and honestly.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is most especially lost through college. Exacerbates modern day college, exacerbates all of these problems of being treated like a baby, of postponing starting your actual adult life until you're 25, 26 for a useless degree that you'll never use, in all likelihood at least. And then when you finally get out of college at 25 or 26, on top of having a crippling debt which you'll likely never pay off, you'll also be thrust into the world with no actual experience, and then you'll find out, oh, I have to pay these bills, oh, I have to pay off this debt, oh, I have to live on my own, and now no one is here to help me.
You'll find USA.
I'm on my own.
USAID.
No one taught me. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
but it's
no, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on, William.
I was just going to say that, like to Father's point, if you're not taught a work ethic, if you're not taught some basic work skills, or to seek out work, then when the time finally comes, whether it's out of high school or out of college, then you're going to be thrown into a pot of boiling water. You're going to rebel and you'll either live with in your parents' basement playing video games, or you'll go on drugs or something like that. It happens too often, that these people, you have reactions. You either react properly, you put your nose to the grindstone and you slave away, which is what you should do, or you just give up, which a lot of people also do.
I'm going to have to be, as usual, a little contrary voice here and say, I think what we're seeing is a lot of package dealing and, again, false dichotomies. One, first of all, there's a conflation here with work and employment for money. Work is productive activity. Employment is employment. It generally means employment, but it doesn't have to mean. So if you zoom out, the broadest context is everybody exists and everybody's going to live, right? We all live. Everyone has talents, and they're going to express them, and they're probably going to gravitate toward those talents. So every one of your children is going to do something. They're going to be working. They're going to be doing things. And they're probably going to do the things they like to do. Now with fallen nature, there's that chance of going down the gutter, doing the easy thing. But in my experience, I've seen children do a lot of things that are difficult because they enjoy doing it and they like the challenge and they embrace the challenge just naturally. This is what they do. They gravitate toward their talents. So let's just unpack that first conflation, right? Work is not the same as employment. I've been employed since I was 14 years old, and I'm miserable because my talents were not identified and they weren't developed. Nobody in school did it. My parents didn't do it. I was kicked out of the house when I was like 18 because that's just what you did. But does that develop the person right? No, it doesn't. I'm 41 years old and never got to work in employment where my talents took me. Now I don't want to make this all about myself and complain a little bit. I'm just saying.
But it's a good example, though.
You don't do any justice to the person because God gave you those talents, and it's the parent's duty, to recognize those talents and develop those talents. And we don't want to decontextualize talent from the broader context of existence, right? And just because we have a fallen human nature doesn't mean that work has to be terrible, and that we have to employ ourselves in misery for work, and we have to do it at 14, get kicked out of the house at 18, and by necessity in that situation go into debt because you no longer have a home, and then you got to go rent it. So I don't want to get too far afield here, but I've lived and experienced the mess, the quagmire that is all these loaded concepts, these package dealing, where they're all these conflated things bunched into the normal modern existence of American life, or even just Western life in the workforce. That's not what it's supposed to be. And I certainly don't want that for my children, and I'm not going to boot them out when they're 18. They're probably going to want to. They're probably going to want to go do something else and go do, but I'm certainly not going to make them leave. And I hope that they're happy, and I want them to be happy because, again, it doesn't have to be all about happiness, but happiness is contextual. Beatitude is its own thing, but and that's the end goal. But happiness isn't averse or contrary to suffering. It's contextualized. Count it all joy, my brethren, when you suffer, and suffer any number of things that our Lord suffered, and that's joy, right? And then happiness is in the attaining of that, the end. But we don't have to just be miserable just to work, and it certainly doesn't help masculinity develop when you just embrace an entire life of just misery. That doesn't help virtue flourish, because then it's overwhelming. You're going to want to escape a little bit because you got to find something to make you feel better, to feel good. And then at work now, I get to actually see the proof of my belief because I see the opposite of it. I work with two guys. They're both 22 or 23 years old. They're the same age, and they're both like-minded. But one wasn't booted out of his house when he was young. He's 23. He has a car paid off and a house paid off, married, 2 kids. The other one, same age, left school, left house, parents got him out, typical kind of baby boomerish like perspective, just get out of the house, you're 18, went into debt. And the gap between these 2 guys who are the same age, similar drive and similar mentality, it's insurmountable. They go their whole life, they're never going to bridge that gap. Like, the one is so far ahead, this one will never catch up. And I think there's a lesson there that you don't have to do the way you were taught. You don't have to go through with that empty nest kind of perspective. And I apologize if there was a little bit of emotion in my voice with any of that, but like, I get kind of passionate about the subject.
Sure, rightly so. And this speaks to something, and I'm really glad you brought that up, even though it came, you thought it was contrary, but it wasn't really. I think everybody here agrees. As to use an analogy, the best time to teach somebody to swim is not when they're drowning.
Yeah, right.
Teach them how to swim before they're faced with that challenge. And I totally agree with you on that, on everything that you said there, but I don't think it's contrary to what, at least not practically, what I'm thinking of here. And I think this is where this really good you bring this up, because we can get to some practical things here. What the example you just gave, and I think what we've been talking about too, shouts at the importance of the role of parents for each individual child. This isn't just the boys, it goes for the girls too, but especially for the boys. Since we're talking about this, we're going to highlight that, as you said, your talents and abilities and stuff were not recognized and you weren't encouraged in that direction. That's a major problem, because parents need to be able to look at their kids and help guide them. We can say kids shouldn't be treated like babies when they're teenagers, but they also shouldn't be taught like they're expected to know everything. They need the guidance of their parents and others to help direct them, to help guide them, to help kind of wake them up if they're pursuing something that is obviously not very good for them. So you can't take a boy that is a very much wanting to do things with his hands, and that's where his talents, his skills, his individual abilities are directed, and say, no, you're not going to pursue those things that you want to pursue, that you're inclined to pursue. You're going to sit in there and you're going to memorize all of this, and you're going to read all of these books, and you're going to become a scientist, or you're going to become a mathematician or something. That's imposing your will and your desire for your child on them and making them fit the mold. That's not good. That's not good direction. That's not looking at an individual as an individual. It's I think there's so much to be said about the role of parents, especially fathers, in this, of encouraging their sons. There's a lot of talk about merit-based now, right? Elon Musk or Vivek or others talking about we need to get back to being merit-based. And the same goes for boys. They need to be put in a position where they can succeed, that they're not always failing. If they fail, okay, and they're doing their best, okay, praise them for that. But direct them, help guide them so that their talents and abilities can be properly developed and not curtailed, not squelched. And I think there's been, with the loss of masculinity and the loss of the sense of the family and of parents, I think generation, I'm not that old, so I didn't live back in the day, but my sense of what happened in society is that parents stepped more out of the picture and said, well, I'm sending my kids to school, they'll take care of them. And I'm busy here, and excuse me. And I'm not very good with talking with kids anyway. So, it's just, they'll figure it out. They have counselors, they have guidance, they have teachers, and teachers can't always fill that role for every single one. And that's not their role. It's the parents' role. So to me, it seems like the step away, so many of the problems in our society is because societally, back in the day, parents stepped away from their role and said, oh, they're going to a good school, they'll take care of everything there. but they didn't address them individually and foster their individual talents and everything. And that's, I think there needs to be a return to that to help develop masculinity and femininity in boys and girls. And that's on an individual basis. There's no two people that are exactly the same, and how they develop and how they understand things needs to be individually tailored. And the parents are the ones that need to do that and need to step up in that regard.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out a.
Yeah,
did I cut you off there, William?
No, you
Okay.
can go ahead.
I'm going to go ahead and throw out a comment here that I think is really good. Scott says parents need to encourage kids' talents, but also instill them a realistic idea what can get them. Unfulfilling work in order to facilitate outside interests or pass is valid. Now, I'm a big believer. I know Kevin likes to preach this on Catholic Family Podcast, especially, but I think also here in the Traditionalists, that our life in terms of who we really are as men, really, I mean, our relationship with God is number one, but then our relationship with family, that's our real life. And so I like to encourage young men, especially who are looking at work. You don't want a job that you absolutely despise because it's soul crushing, and it's hard to wake up in the morning. But you also don't want a job that you love too much. I think I had this for a short time. You don't want a job you love too much, because then it consumes you and you're going to just cheat and work extra hours. You're going to bring it home with you. You're going to be, it's going to take over your family. And so, I mean, to say unfulfilling, I guess that's probably a pretty good word for it. I mean, that's where I am with my professional career right now. I've got a job I don't love, I don't hate. It pays the bills. I go and they give them good 40 hours. They give me a good paycheck at the end of 2 weeks or end of the month. We're even, and I can spend my real life with my family because they're number one.
Yeah, it's kind of like vocation, avocation. Actually, something that you've talked to me about before is that a job and a career is a means to a better end. It shouldn't be an end in itself. I mean, the exceptions can be made. If you're single and your vocation is your avocation, say teaching. But by and large, your career shouldn't be your main goal. It should be an end to obtaining your goal. Be that the family life. If you're in that position, then it should be for quality time, or to give your family that little bit of extra comfort, that little bit of extra means. Living, and of course I can't speak to this with any kind of authority, being an unmarried 19-year-old. But just and I think it just from just shooting from the head can. But your career, while it should be, it is important, and it should take a precedence for men, especially men. The job they get, it should not be all consuming, and it should not be the end. It should be a means to an end. But that's my 2 cents with that.
Brian, do you want to pop in there, or
Well, I mean, that's something I think about a lot. I haven't really resolved it yet. Work is important. It has a very important place, and it's why man exists. Before the fall, our purpose was to work. Adam was put in the garden to rule it. To Radah and Kabash, to work that garden. Just because Adam and Eve sinned and mankind has fallen into a state deprived of sanctifying grace, doesn't mean that work has to be misery. Now, the balance of home and work, and the particulars of it, and how one goes about being a good Christian in our society, which is not Christian, and then this possible groundswell of the younger generation wanting a Christian society, and what that might work for how labor works and how it looks, and the 40-hour work week, which is a practical slavery. As we began this, right, we kind of joked about being wage slaves, and that's true. And how does one go about being a happy wage slave? And that's the question that we all have to answer, I think. and then pray and hope that God gives us work that at least fits well, right? I heard somebody say that when our Lord said, "My yoke is easy, my burden is light," it just means that it fits well. That you still have the burden to carry, but the yoke being easy means that it fits properly. So I think we have to hope to find that easy, that yoke that fits right, because nobody wants to. It's very uncomfortable to wear a suit that doesn't quite fit, and we all want to have that suit that fits well.
Very good.
And then to develop that virtue, I guess to deal with this slightly ill-fitting suit is one thing, and then to deal with this suit that's way out of proportion is maybe a different thing. And I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet.
Well, there is as a Catholic, there's always the thought that if I'm doing this for the right reasons, then at least I will have that supernatural reward, eternal reward. And so that gets into the spiritual of the goals and the higher part. But there is at least that. But I think some. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts just jumping out at the moment, but there's sometimes a mindset of just sit back and say a prayer and hope everything works out, instead of try to do what you can and leave the rest up to God.
Right.
Anyway, I kind of lost my train of thought. Yeah, I was going to respond to something that Ryan said, but I lost it. So
sorry.
No. You're not your fault. Not your fault.
But I think it's important as Ben, and we'll start kind of wrapping things up because I think we're kind of up almost up on time here. But I do think that putting our heads down and especially when life is not treating us well, things aren't going well at work. We got flat. We've had a problem with every time we have a car problem or a problem with the house or whatever get resolved, another one pops up, and it's been unceasing these last couple of months or so. But I think to have the attitude that as men, we just put our head down and we deal with it and we charge through. I think that really, for me at least, is one of the keys to manliness. We don't complain about things. We don't emote. We solve problems. We conquer. And I think all men need something to conquer. And sometimes it's the stupid. Sometimes it's ourselves, and sometimes it's the stupid little things that we need to conquer.
Well, I think we all have to conquer ourselves first.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what binds us all together is that the necessity to conquer self is universal.
And that's men and women.
Right.
Yeah.
God created, male and female are both man, right? Like we're both the parts of mankind. And so, and that brings back to what Father said earlier, like it's a veer, right? You can't be a man if you're not virtuous. And part of that true masculinity is the virtue. And that requires conquering of self. And then you can set out to conquer the mountain. But the mountain of your own appetites is definitely in sight for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what gaineth it a man if he, gains the whole world and suffers the loss of his own soul?
Yeah, and there's a lot of work to be done in that department. If you actually read what spiritual writers talk about, like the virtues, fortitude. I mean, what's entailed in that? There's a lot that's entailed in that. Prudence. There's a lot. Temperance and prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. These are the 4 cardinal virtues, and I don't think a lot of men think about those. They just kind of go along their natural inclinations or what other people have told them how they should act or whatever. And everybody is called to sanctity, but everybody's different, and so they're going and has a different situation in life, and so how they practice those virtues in their independent or individual cases, how they develop them. There's a lot of thought and prayer that needs to come into that, and also talking to others, other good counselors, good advisors, because if we're just left to our own to figure it out, it's going to be pretty darn tough, and we're going to have a lot more pitfalls than if we had somebody else to help us along that has more experience in the matter, or at least can give us an outside opinion.
Absolutely. All right. So I think that we're about out of time here, and this is I had some other news stories lined up, and just in case we couldn't go the whole time, but I think that this is a subject that just that you could talk about for hours here, and I hope that everybody who has been on tonight has hopefully learned a little bit something, had something to take away, and can be a little wiser, a little richer for the experience. And I guess, um, William, can I start with you, and we'll do some final thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I was thinking, of touching on about with stoicism and emotions, but we'll touch on that some other day. I'm sure. But as final thoughts for everything we've talked about today is, yeah, it's tough to be a man, especially in these times. But if it isn't tough, then it isn't worth doing, right? So the harder, the pain is the glory, or at least the pain should be the glory, to a certain sense. Um, that just because it's hard, not only does it mean that we should not do it, it means that we should give more effort into doing it, and then take more satisfaction in having achieved it, and just becoming more masculine, or dealing with the issue of masculinity, is that, yeah, it's while it's very, very important, and it's something that is achieved step by step throughout our own lives.
Very good, Ryan.
Yeah, well, and I think Father mentioned it when he joined. He mentioned, or no, maybe it was the video we watched. But anyway, the 5th chapter of Ephesians. Um, and there's a memorable verse in that, Ephesians 5, chapter 25. Husbands, love your wives as Christ also loved the church and delivered himself up for it, that he might sanctify it, cleansing it by the laver of water and the word of life. And then, so also ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. And but this entire chapter speaks very much to virtue, and the opposites of virtue. The first few verses here, be ye therefore followers of God as most dear children, and walk in love as Christ also hath loved us, and hath delivered himself for us, an oblation and a sacrifice to God for an odor of sweetness. But fornication and all uncleanness, covetousness, let it not so much as be named among you, as becometh saints. And then various other things. And I would just reiterate then that that's what we have to do is suffer, but in context, and step by step, overcoming self, so that we can overcome workplace issues, and then overcome domestic issues, and overcome ultimately societal issues, and hopefully by the long and the only path we have, conquer America and have a Christian social order, which is what we all want.
Very good, Father.
Yeah, great comments there, Ryan.
Thank you.
I'm going to try to keep it short, but there's a lot of things a lot of thoughts. The kind of what Ryan was saying there, just that little bit kind of touches on what I wanted to say. That we all know of the Jordan Peterson line, clean your room before you go out and try to clean up society, clean your room. And I'm not advocating for people following Jordan Peterson. I think I've listened to some things that he says that are great, and some things he says are just totally off mark, but there's some comments, there's some good advice in that, of the work on yourself, before you try to solve all the other problems and issues, and developing self, developing virtue, so very important. But without acknowledging God and his rights and our duties to him, there can be no real virtue. There can be no solid virtue. There can be certainly no supernatural virtue. And this is where the natural derived for perfection or improvement or whatever else falls short, because it doesn't have everything in their proper proportions. Because if you're leaving God out of the equation, then you are God, and that isn't good for man. It's completely contrary to our nature, and completely and causes so many problems. You have people that work out and are tough, but they are so full of pride and vanity and other issues that it can cause people to say, well, I don't want to be like him. I don't want to be, I'll just sit back and do what I want to do and just make everything about me again. There's, without humility, which we can have a proper understanding of without a belief and a faith in God, there can't be any really solid good virtue and improvement in society. So I think it goes back to that. It goes back to virtue. It goes back to acknowledging God and His rights and our duties to Him. The importance of humility, of recognizing that we are flawed and we're never going to be perfect in this world, but we can do the best we can. If thankfully God looks more at our efforts than He does at our success. If we're doing the best we can, God will help make up the difference. That I think that should be a important thing for men to realize, that you're not going to be perfect, but you should strive for it. You might not always get it right, but if you do your best, God will make up the difference. So there's a lot to say to humility there, but I'll stop there so it doesn't turn into a 20-minute long ending.
Yeah, we can. Oh, your show is on Friday, Father. We'll that might be good fodder for you for your Friday show. But I'm going to go ahead and close real quick with some thought. Really, the intent of the show tonight, and part of the reason we didn't get into this is because I didn't get the screen share worked out and couldn't get the sound working. But we'll work on that for next week. But really, I think that my point for having the show tonight was that I think in a certain sense we are winning. At least we're turning a corner. At least I think that we've got leadership. We've gone from Joe Biden to Donald Trump. We've gone from some of these freaks that Biden had in his cabinet to J.D. Vance, and now as of today, Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. and you got some manly men out there, much better examples, Tom Homan, things like that, and I do think that societally we have a fantastic opportunity here to make this case to our younger generation, especially even with the older generation, that it's critical, and we have a chance here. When I was growing up, these types of discussions weren't even had mainstream. If you had them, they were off in a newsletter somewhere that nobody paid attention to. But I think we are getting onto the right track, and we have opportunities ahead of us, and I think that we're all going to want to work in that direction. So with that, guys, thank you very much for being in the chat, the comments. I know this is usually a Thursday show, but we have a St. Valentine's Day party tomorrow that is going to take a couple of us away, and so we wanted to do things on Wednesday night tonight. But great having you, and I hope this was good stuff. Please, for the algorithm, once the show's over and the stream is over, like, and if you haven't subscribed, subscribe and leave a comment. You did a great job last week, and it really helps to improve our numbers. We are slowly getting up to 400, 500, 600 views a week, which is, for only being in business for 6 weeks, is fantastic. But thank you all, and God bless, and we will see you next week.